Hello there, people and listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Jez Galaun onto the podcast. I hope I said that right, mate. A few practices.
Spot on.
Jez has very, very kindly welcomed me to his tap room, Brixton Brewery tap room. And we are going to dive deep into the story today. Just a bit of context for listeners. So Brixton Brewery was set up in 2013 with three other co-founders. They've grew the brand until November 2017 when they sold a 49% stake to Heineken. And then in January 2021, they've sold over 100% of the company. So, yeah, mate, super excited. Thank you for having me. Can take these headphones off now?
Pleasure. Thank you for coming down.
So I we're going to meander with the time stamps here.
Sure.
I think what's interesting is lots of people listen to this podcast with the exit in mind. They think of the exit and actually some of the feedback I've had from listeners is like, how do you actually sell a food and drink brand? It's this mirage in the distance that they seem to be sauntering towards and meandering towards.
Yes.
But it's like, okay, how do you actually sell a food and drink brand? And I would love to kind of dive deep into that and really pull at the weeds of that because I think it's fascinating. But the first thing is, what did it feel like on the evening when you go to sleep on the day you've sold 49% of your business to Heineken in 2017? Like, what are the voices in your head and what's the feeling in your soul?
You have mixed feelings because, you're bringing someone else into the family. The brewery started in 2013 as a family business, two local couples, we bonded over newborn babies and, we're part of this incredible, amazing community in Brixton that embraced us. And we made the decision to allow, a major shareholder, 49%, as you mentioned, into the business, not, a small shareholder, but that's, pretty significant. And because we take the name Brixton and, we don't take that lightly, we want to make sure that we do things right by our team, the community where we are. So we put a lot of thought into it. If I'm honest with you, people have asked me, was it a tough decision? And honestly, it wasn't, because we knew the opportunities it would provide for the brand and the business and our staff. And we wanted to fully embrace that. We also felt it was a massive endorsement of the work that we'd done up to that point. For someone like Heineken to come out of the blue and knock on our door and say, hey guys, we like what you're doing. We want to support your growth. Do you want to have a chat? We've always been very open-minded here and, we said yes. But, saying that, the night before, I don't think we had any second thoughts, to be honest with you. We were convinced that it was the right thing to do for us as individuals, for our families, for our staff, for our beers. I don't think it's something you can say no to be honest with you.
So you said they'd given you opportunities that you couldn't have garnered if you'd carried on going it alone. So you're at this crossroads, it was fascinating. What were some of those opportunities for yourself, your staff, your team, Brixton?
So for us, because we are Brixton Brewery and we are so intrinsically linked to the community here, I think of us having this umbilical cord that attaches us to Brixton.
Yeah.
We moved here as founders in 2006, separately of each other. We met a few years later, living a few doors down from each other on the same road, like ships passing in the night for a number of years. And, we had grown. So we started in one arch in 2013, we spread into a second arch, then we had a third. And we were looking around and we're like, well, we're quite landlocked here, but we want to keep brewing in Brixton. And to scale up is when you're at your most vulnerable, basically, as a business, because you're making a huge investment. You're taking on big overheads, rent, staff, all that kind of thing. And you're hoping that you're going to keep, finding people to sell your product to, that you're going to make a hell of a lot more beer, basically. we looked around at various sites in Brixton that were not as big as the one that we actually ultimately moved to, that opened in summer of 2018, that were kind of in between where we were at the time and where we're at now. And we tried to sort of, project, is this the right move for us and that kind of thing. And we were confident that we could pull it off, but it just happened to be around the same time that we were looking at doing that, Heineken knocked on our door. So we became a little bit more ambitious, and we actually went for the biggest site that we could find whilst remaining in Brixton. And they, fully got behind that. They got the importance of us brewing in Brixton, because it's, just so important to the company culture. They related to it. And they also gave us access to their distribution. So we knew that the extra beer that we produced, we'd have customers for. So that was really helpful, shall we say.
So it was almost, so Heineken came, it's almost like they could pour gasoline on the flames, the nascent flames that you've been bubbling or growing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we basically didn't grow as fast as other breweries. There's a big cohort of breweries that started up in 2012, 2013, and some...
Such as?
So people like 4 Pure, 5 Points, Beavertown, I think were a year before us. A few in the north, like Northern Monk, I think Siren were around the same time, people like that. Magic Rock, I think, were around the same time in Huddersfield. And, some people took bigger risks than us and grew more quickly than we did. I'd say we were probably quite conservative. We always believed in the brand and our potential. And, wherever we sold our beers, they sold really well. Like we basically, since we had our opening party in 2013, which was in the arch next door, where we were like a bit worried no one was going to turn up. Yeah. But, we sold out a draft beer by 5 p.m. We'd like to say that we've been struggling to keep up ever since because we've been growing, obviously putting COVID aside. But, I think it was just so important to us to stay true to the original values of being a community-based brewery and business. And that meant keeping brewing in Brixton, basically.
And I interviewed Charlie McVeigh. Do you know Charlie McVeigh?
I do, yeah.
The podcast went live yesterday, but we interviewed a while ago. And he said something which was fascinating, which is, it's actually from the, that Sapiens book.
Yes, yeah.
It says a business is essentially a fiction. And I've been writing about this in my newsletter. And it's like, actually, movements, everything is a fiction. The Constitution's a fiction. The Bible's a fiction. And the reason Neanderthals, whatever you call it.
Neanderthals.
The Neanderthals, yeah. The reason they progressed was because of stories allowed things to move together, communities together. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about, like, why do some ideas spread and others don't? And ultimately, it was the story of craft beer, the story of we want a better tasting product, we want a better tasting a beer, and we want to do things collectively. And as we said before we recorded, when the what's the phrase you said, when the thing rises, the boats...
The rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, exactly,
yes.
Yeah. And that, to me, I think that is why craft beer really took off, because people were helping each other.
Yeah.
As you said before we recorded, a buyer comes knocking your door, you recommend the brewery down the road.
Yeah.
So what I really believe happened is this story of craft beer really... But what I'd love to know is, why do you think there's a plethora of breweries, all individual, all doing good things? Why do you think, what's different about Brixton that's like Heineken knocking on your door versus others?
Interesting question. I think they'd actually done some research and they looked into various craft brands.
Yeah.
And they had a company that talked to people and showed them the brands. And I think they already had a conviction about us, but they wanted to kind of confirm it. And I think they were looking for a brand that is tapping into consumer trends for provenance, authenticity, identity. And, I think we ticked all those boxes. Even though we were very, very small, it was very obvious to anyone who cared to come down here and look that, we were doing things in a very authentic, genuine, value-driven way. And, I think craft brewers in general do that. There are some craft brands that, were basically created to scale and sell. And I think you can sniff those from a mile off, to be honest with you. And they may not be a brand of the future. They may be, who knows? But, I think Heineken felt that, the values that we have in Brixton, the place and the business would be enduring and strong and, allow us to reach our potential effectively. And, I think we've proven that over the last 5 years of our partnership. We've grown 20-fold in that time. So, we're now the UK's fourth biggest UK on-trade craft brand. So we came from a very sort of low base, and other breweries had kind of grown more quickly than us because they took more risks or, for whatever reason. But, we're now kind of reaching our potential. I think we're still just getting started, to be honest with you, 10 years in. But, I'm very excited about what the next 10 years can bring. And, I think, it's nice that we all sort of had local breweries around us and near us that, we could share ideas, challenges, problems. I think the industry is very collaborative. We continue to have a very open, collaborative approach. There was a local brewery the other day that came and used some of our equipment to test some of their beers. We'll borrow ingredients when we're short from other breweries and, them from us and that kind of thing. So that does definitely still exist, and long may it continue. Because that's kind of one of the things that attracted me to the industry. I think we as craft brewers start out as sort of, because beer was so, what's the right word? It became a bit bland, to be honest with you, in terms of styles. And, craft brewers came along, and I think of craft beer as a bit of a disruptive technology. It came along and it disrupted the status quo. I'm not saying we did necessarily, in our own little way we did, but, there's obviously people that did the hard yards before us, that, we're kind of riding in their slipstream, as it were. And it reawakened consumer interest in beer, much like it had done in the US. The trend started in the US before it came to the UK. But, when it arrived and people tried the beers that, use more interesting ingredients like US hops and that kind of thing. I mean, I can remember my personal eureka moment, and it was quite similar to a lot of brewers. If you interview quite a few craft brewers, they'd probably tell you the same story. And that was, one of the pioneers was the Colonel in Bermondsey. And Evan O'Riordan, discovered US hops, started homebrewing with them, was like, oh man, these are pretty interesting flavors. And I can remember going down to the Colonel on a Saturday morning. A friend of mine lived in Borough at the time. It was probably around the late 2000s, the late noughties, I think. And, I had a bottle of this beer, and, it just tasted so different and so incredibly amazing. And there were two things that really, really struck me about that. Well, one was the flavors, and I looked and, there was a hop called Citra that I'd never heard of, and the other thing was, he was sharing a railway arch with a cheese producer, and the brewery was in the corner. And my perception until then was like, brewing is this big industrial process. You go down, big kind of A roads or whatever, and you see these massive breweries, and you're like, that must be how beer is made. But actually, he was making a really valuable product, as in, the value to me as a consumer, like the flavor, the taste, the appearance, the satisfaction I got in the corner of a railway arch. And that for me just blew my mind. And it was that kind of lit the spark in my mind that it was going to be possible to do something in Brixton. And I actually couldn't believe that no one had done it before us.
What's fascinating is, I know you had Innocent like in the early noughties as like the Rumbunctious Challenger brand. You had maybe like Goo puddings, but I think craft beer was the first movement that gave it any category carte blanche to like be the David versus Goliath story.
Yeah.
I think obviously Brewdog were great at that. The kind of very in your face marketing campaigns against the big guys. But that allowed for, like Manny Life, you've got the peanuts over there, peanut butter to be premiumized and to offer new things. We were talking before we hit the record button, baking.
Yeah.
Be waiting for that coffee to kick in, mate. but baking, or the plethora of all these bakeries across London. But I genuinely believe the first person or first category to fly that flag was craft beer. And I also think, in terms of, it's really interesting towns, and what I want to kind of tease out with you is have we gone too far? And this isn't just in craft beer, but in general. But as we were saying before we hit record, I genuinely believe 3 of the biggest, they are like the most interesting towns, but actually 3 of the biggest brands in London are probably Brixton, Camden, and Notting Hill. You haven't got a Notting Hill beer yet.
There was one, actually.
Oh, was there?
It didn't stay the course.
It was too arty-farty around there, too bohemian.
Yeah. Oh, in fact, there is a Portobello brewing company.
There we go.
So.
But I think a big part of this is there's Brixton works because Brixton is so, you walk down that road and it's like something you've never seen before in a beautiful way. It's such an eclectic hodge-podge melting pot. What are your thoughts on, like, I'm not going to say names, but there's a beer brand or a gin brand in every city now. What do you think?
I think it's great that there is, to be honest with you, because, they do have a role in the local community. They give you an experience, a local experience. And I think people really value a local kind of story, and that kind of thing. And I think if it's done in the right way, I'm fully up for it. I just think it's amazing. There's actually a rum distillery in Brixton here, which, I think they're doing great things. There's also a gin brand, but it's kind of got the name Brixton, but not much more than that, to be honest with you. It's like, doesn't have the kind of the community connection and the deep roots. So I think if you can do it well, and, you may kind of break out of your local community. I think a lot of the brands that you're probably thinking about maybe don't, or maybe will not have that opportunity. But I think it's nice. I'd enjoy going, it's a bit of a busman's holiday, but I enjoy going around, trying, the local beer or the local spirit or, bakery even, and that kind of thing. It adds to, the experience. And I think if it's done well and authentically and, it's a high quality thing and it's not just kind of slapping the name on a product kind of thing, I'm all for it. Yeah.
And so Brixton's a huge part. As you said, you've got, I think what you were saying there is you've got to authentically link back to the community. Mm-hmm. We've talked about how you were saying it's like a no-brainer for Heineken to come on. They've got access. They can give you opportunities that you couldn't do on your own. Yeah. First question is, like, what size was the business when Heineken came on? Yep. In terms of whatever you want to say.
I can give it to you in volume.
Yeah, volume. Yeah.
I'm not the numbers guy, but I can give you the volume. So, yeah.
So volume would be great. And then I suppose we've talked about the good, but what is the bad and the ugly? And I think it's really important to address this because you've put your heart and soul into this bad boy. Mm-hmm. You've worked so hard. There's going to be sometimes nefarious things that come along.
Yeah, there's trade-offs.
There's a
trade-off. Yeah, there are. So in terms of the size of the business, and this is like annual production in hectolitres, which is basically 100 litres of beer. I think in 2017, when we partnered with Heineken, we produced 2,800 hectolitres, and that was all from the arch next door to us. And, we were squeezing out as much as we possibly could, like just going as fast as we possibly could. And this year, I think we're going to sell 60,000 hectolitres. So it's more than a 20-fold increase. And, we're trying to build the brand in a sustainable way. And, that is, making sure that it has the support that it needs to be a sustainable, enduring brand. Because I think, you can build a brand more quickly than that. But, you may have to make a few compromises along the way, whether it's commercials, you might have to, erode your margins, get more distribution, which, we want to maintain and build and enhance our brand equity. So, we're building things in a considered way that, protects our margin, but also protects the margin of the retailers that we work with, so that, we are, building brand equity, investing in, all the right areas, marketing and that kind of thing. So, that's one of the good things that comes from having the support of someone like Heineken is you get the ability and the time and, the luxury to do that in a way, because, they are now owners of the brand. I feel like I'm a custodian, I'm the founder and I see the brand as like an extension of me and the other founders and that kind of thing. And I don't want to build too fast in an unsustainable way. You see brands come into the market and grow very quickly, but they don't hang around because, they just haven't executed their commercial strategy well. So like Guinness had a brand, Hop House 13, which was like a craft lager, and it was everywhere. And everyone was like, wow, this is amazing. This is such a great product launch. But they actually withdrew it from the market because it didn't make them any money. So, for me, I'm trying to build a brand that has an enduring legacy. And, with Heineken, we've got a really good partner to be able to do that. Now, obviously, there are trade-offs. I remember when we did first sell, and we were talking about it a bit earlier, I was feeling all sorts of different emotions. And this probably happened after, we actually signed the deal and that kind of thing. And then, I immediately set about building a new brewery in Brixton, because kind of the deal at that time was, Mike and I, co-founder, pitched to Heineken a business plan, and it said, look, if you really want to support us, we want to build a new brewery in Brixton, and here's the business plan, and this is how we're going to do it. And they, immediately got behind that, and they said, yes, that makes perfect sense to us. But then you have to build a brewery, which is kind of all consuming and really full on. But I do remember, and it took me a little while to realize, but I was basically going through the 7 stages of grief, where you kind of, your emotions do different things at different times, and then you kind of come to terms with things eventually. But I do remember like, oh my goodness, this is actually like what I'm going through kind of thing. So there is that.
Just to zoom in on that. So what was the darkest day? Because as you said, growing and building a brand is like your baby. You've got this link, this umbilical cord to the community. That somewhat gets severed. Like what's the darkness?
I don't think it's necessarily a darkness, but you feel quite flattered because someone like, has come along and acquired your brand, and you feel elated and that kind of thing. But then, you have to process all the emotions that come along with that. And that you've set your business on a different trajectory or a different path. And, we obviously made a decision across the 4 founders, basically. So it wasn't just my decision. It was a unanimous decision, but I felt like I was more or less responsible because, I was the one that kind of was in the business the most and that kind of thing. So I felt the biggest kind of responsibility for that. And I just wanted to make sure that, we upheld our side of the bargain and they also upheld theirs and that kind of thing. So, like any relationship, you've got to get to know each other and work together and figure out how to work. We were working in one railway arch and then all of a sudden we're working with like the world's 2nd biggest brewer. And that's, a pretty big step change in many ways. And, especially if you want to, sell beer into a distribution network that has a lot of rules and regulations and procedures and processes. You're very agile as a startup. And when you start working with a corporate who by, their nature are not agile, you've got a clash of cultures basically. And you've just got to navigate that. And, if you've got good people in that corporate who can, support you and hold your hand and, you can work together. And we were very fortunate that we did have that and we do still have that. That is super, super important because, I think otherwise, it could get rocky, right? Because
Yeah, what I'm trying to explore is it, 'cause it seems, I don't mean this I just mean this, it seems like almost too good to be true, right? So it's like you're growing this brand in Brixton, Heineken come knocking on your door, they give you this huge distribution, huge funding, you build the next brewery, like it's like you're off to the races. So they come in, and what were the specific like hardest things in the actual deal? So like what was in the specific deal?
you've got to agree commercial terms, obviously. So it actually took us about a year. Sorry, that's the urinal flushing.
Yeah, no worries. That's the authenticity, as I
There
say.
you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, you basically got to entrust that they are going to be a good custodian for the brand. So you've got to put some guardrails around that, and
Such as?
just what are they going to commit to? What are they what things are they going to do for the business and the brand? And just try and ensure that it's not really like a legal or a commercial thing. It's just more that you want to have an understanding, and you want to have all of the conversations up front so that you don't have to have difficult conversations later on, basically. So, are you going to invest in marketing, or what customers are we going to target first, and that kind of thing, so that you really get that sort of flywheel spinning, and you build on the opportunity and the brand momentum, and because it's very easy to do a deal and partner with someone. That's kind of, I'm being a bit facetious, but that's the easy part. But actually executing the partnership and building on the relationship, because our model was that we would supply beer into the Heineken distribution network, and then the Heineken sales force would go out and sell our beer as part of their kind of broader portfolio to their customers. But that is also something that you need to think about, because in a business like Heineken that has a broad range of beers and in their portfolio, they're going to have different priorities. So you're basically fighting for share of mind internally amongst the sales team. And, the sales team are going to respond to the incentives or the KPIs that they are given. So you can't take it as a given that you're going to basically immediately start winning sales and that kind of thing. If you have a product that the sales team needs to actually win business for themselves, then, you're good. And luckily we did, because as it transpired, AB InBev had bought Camden Town Brewery, a good few years before. And, that was part of the AB InBev, Budweiser Brewing Group portfolio. And Heineken didn't have a UK craft brand in their portfolio. They had Lagunitas from the US, and they actually had a brand that they created internally called Maltsmiths, which had kind of limited reach. So we came along, and all of a sudden they were like, oh, well, we can go to customers and we can compete with our portfolio on the same kind of way that, AB InBev would with having Camden in their portfolio. So that was definitely helpful to kind of get started. But, those are the kind of things that, it's worth talking about and, considering, because, we were also small, and we didn't have, a big sales team. In fact, before we partnered with Heineken, we didn't even have anyone in sales or marketing, if you can believe it, because I don't think we could really afford to hire them, to be honest. And there was nowhere for them to sit either. We had this little mezzanine upstairs, and was only so much room. But so I think, to answer your question, I think it's just try and fully explore how you think things are going to work, not just, early partnership, but what's going to be the sort of the 3-5 year plan. And, just try and get some commitments and maybe some targets in mind up front, and that kind of thing, just so that you're basically on the same page and you're both moving forward. If you're going to stay with the business, like some founders don't stay with the business, but I always wanted to stay. And obviously we were 49-51 partnership. So that was always going to be the case.
Was there anything else you were sort of deliberate, like not dithering around on, but like any other things that you before you went into the deal thinking, oh, how's this going to work? Because I completely get, like, I had a mate who worked for Camden.
Yeah.
Who was with me at Manny, one of my really good mates, and he was there the day when they sold to AB and Bev. And he was in grocery, and he said the issue is you go in when you work for Camden, you're like, I work for Camden, I work for Camden, I'm part of me is this brand.
Yes.
So you have that energy and conviction, which I think you need in sales. But then he was like, oh, well, I'd go into a Sainsbury's meeting, for example, be like, okay, you don't want Camden. Oh, don't worry, mate, I've got you some Corona. I think, yeah. Oh, you don't want Corona, I've got you some of this. It's like, you almost feel like David Brent going in, and you're selling windscreen wipers, or like, what does he sell? Like tampons or something like that, yeah.
Paper,
yeah. And it's like, I completely empathise with that, understand that. But was there anything else that you were like, oh, and how did you kind of get over that?
I don't think there really was. Basically, because we were so naive, we didn't really know what we were doing. We were operating inside this craft beer bubble.
Right.
And, the brewery was basically everything, or 80% of what we produced, we sold within 5 miles of the brewery, basically. And we weren't even like swimming outside of like the craft beer bubble enough to understand that as you grow and you scale and you start working with bigger retailers, the commercials are going to change. They're going to demand a different price level. Actually, I remember in the early discussions with Heineken, something that actually worked in our favor was I told them that Young's, the big pub group, had wanted to stock our beer. And, they would ask us sort of every 6 to 9 months, have you got beer that you can sell to us? And I knew that they would demand, a more competitive price because they're a bigger retailer, and they were giving us kind of access to their pubs and their, and I would always say to them, sorry, we don't have enough. I can sell everything I'm producing at, my list price effectively. And I told that to Heineken, and they were like, hang on a minute, you basically turned Young's down? And that blew their minds. So, there's things like that, that you've got to kind of understand that when you move out of like your sort of your niche and, your small bubble. And I think this is especially true kind of in craft beer, because you have a lot of independent retailers, whether they be pubs or off licenses or bottle shops and that kind of thing. As soon as you want to grow your distribution and start selling to bigger customers, you have to accept that your kind of commercial strategy is probably going to have to adapt around that. So that, we just didn't really, we were pretty naive. We were running a good, local, effective, profitable business, and we were building the brand. But, it was basically Mike and I and our wives, and we were just learning as we went along. And, I don't think we really knew what the next sort of commercial evolution of the business would look like. So we didn't know enough to kind of maybe say at the point that we did the deal, okay, this is kind of what we need to think about and that kind of thing. But one thing we did do is we set a volume ambition with Heineken, and we said, look, this is what we think we can do as Brixton. We want you to tell us what you think you can do in terms of volume with the brand over a time horizon. And I think that was really helpful, because we could track our progress against it effectively. And, we could kind of also, they could say to us, well, hang on, you're not doing what you said you were going to be doing, and vice versa. So that kind of stuff I think is quite helpful.
Sorry if this is too personal, you don't have to answer it at all. It's what listeners asked me to ask.
Let's go for it.
So I asked this to Juliet Barrett from Grenade. She said she'd made 250 million, and it was like the worst day of her life when that money dropped in her bank account. Will Chase from Tyrrell's said he made 50 million, and he said, "But I literally stick this quote. I should probably have it on my arm, but he said, when you're in the winner's enclosure, you realise all the fun was in the race." But how much, you don't have to go specific numbers, but how much did you actually make out of the deal? Because it feels like they've come in and Like, it seems too good to be true.
I can't tell you the amount, but I can tell you it was nowhere close to the numbers we were basically operating out of one run railway arch.
Yeah.
So, we didn't start Brixton Brewery with the idea that we would at some point exit. So, we were building just organically and slowly and in a considered way. And then obviously Heineken came along out of the blue. I remember saying to Mike, I've just got this email from Heineken, and he's like, is it April 1st kind of thing? That wasn't really what we were looking for or thought would happen. We always thought the brand had potential, but, we were just so small in that kind of, I was like amazed that, someone like Heineken knocked on our door. But I mean, no, I felt it was an endorsement, and I actually felt good about it. And I think there's a reason I did. And that's because I think at the time I was a bit done with craft beer, if I'm honest with you, like the movement.
Because
there were certain things going on, and there were things that I just couldn't really feel at peace or come to terms with or reconcile personally. And that was, I didn't like the hype culture in craft beer. I don't think it really exists as strongly now. I think actually there are some breweries that, are kind of regarded highly in that kind of thing, but there were times when...
Sorry. When you say hype culture, by that you mean...
So...
As an example?
So for example, breweries that were making really strong hoppy beers, double, triple IPAs, and, really sort of playing into, people who are really into those kind of craft, extreme craft beers, like ultra modern craft beers, were regarded as like amazing breweries, and became really quite hyped and highly regarded and that kind of thing. And that's not really what we're about at Brixton. Our philosophy was to be a community-based local brewery that brewed accessible styles that anyone and everyone could approach and enjoy. But the craft beer kind of bubble or world didn't really embrace that. They were like, okay, well, no, you guys aren't a good brewery because you're not making a triple IPA with 30 grams of hops per litre kind of thing. And that's not really what we ever set out to do. And there were other breweries that kind of, did that, and, they would market themselves very effectively, and, they would be talked about all the time on social media, and, they're an amazing brewery and that kind of thing. And people didn't really attach as much value to breweries that weren't doing those kind of extreme beers, but we never really wanted to make extreme beers. We kind of have got a saying in the brewery, we're always seeking balance. So there was that, and I was like, well, I'm actually really happy and comfortable with what we're doing and the beers that we're producing, and I think we're doing a really good job and that kind of thing, but we're not getting as much attention. So when Heineken came along and we're like, hang on a minute, we like what you guys are doing, and you're getting attention from a different audience, and I was happy about that, to be honest with you. It made me feel proud that, someone like Heineken would come along and notice what we were doing, and maybe the beer geeks weren't noticing so much. And, there was that. And then, at the same time, some of the breweries that were, getting plaudits, lauded, were maybe not great in terms of their company culture and values. And that I also kind of... I think,
is that like Brewdog?
Yeah, not just Brewdog. There's a few others, that maybe, had some questionable practices and that kind of thing, which I'll actually, I think I was ultimately kind of vindicated in this, because there was a bit of a Me Too moment in craft beer or movement where a lot of these toxic practices actually came out. And, some of the breweries that at the time, when I did the deal with Heineken, or we did the deal with Heineken, I was kind of like noticing these things, but I didn't feel like anyone else was. eventually these things did come out.
So give some examples of that. You don't have to say the names. I don't want to say the names of the breweries.
Well, it could be, around, poor employee treatment and relations, or, misogyny, or just sort of having a poor health and safety culture, all this kind of thing. And I've always been proud of our company culture. We've been very, very fortunate that, we've got really good staff retention. I don't think people like to leave Brixton Brewery. They do leave for life decisions and that kind of thing, but we very rarely, or career decisions, but we very rarely, or I don't think we've ever lost anyone for the wrong reasons, kind of thing, which I'm really proud of. So you've got that thing with the beers, and, some people are like, oh, well, you're not a great brewery because you're not making these kind of like extreme styles of beers. And also the brewers that were maybe doing that and, were a bit, sort of full of themselves, then also had these cultural issues, and people weren't really noticing those as well. So that kind of, that troubled me, I think, at the time. And then, even South London, I think, has been underrepresented in terms of recognition of our contribution to brewing in the capital. So, Hackney, Bermondsey, places like that, we're getting a lot of the attention. And, we've got some amazing, fantastic breweries in South London. So a combination of those three things, I was totally at peace with it. I was kind of done with it, to be honest with you.
It's mad. That's why I love doing these conversations, because it's almost zooming out that craft beer has a similar kind of extremism and tribalism to football.
Yeah.
I've been on. I've got. Do you know the guys, Louis and James at Local, the Local Three Beer?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're doing an event with them actually.
Nice. I know Keir, who's...
Keir's one of my really good mates.
Yeah, so Keir I know because he used to sell my beer at Heineken.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, shaggers. He's hilarious.
Yeah, he's great.
So that's my only kind of... And then I've got a mate who's got a brand called Jiddler's Tipple, which is interesting. Yeah, Jacob, top guy. And... that's my kind of my only link other than consuming it. But I've always... on the being privy to it somewhat, seen this tribalism, but now what you're explaining now, so you get a lot of flack for hashtag selling out, I suppose, in their eyes.
Yes.
How do you internally navigate that?
I'm totally at peace with it, as the other founders are, and I can remember being nervous when I told the news to our staff and our team what the decision that we'd made. And the way we did it, actually, or the way I did it, was we'd got the keys to where we opened the new brewery. We had this 15,000 square foot basically empty building, and I brought them along, and I sort of showed them the building, and I said, we're opening a new brewery here, and I'm going to tell you how we're doing it.
Yeah.
And then I told them about the news, and to a person, everyone was so excited, got behind it, and trusted us, because they just knew that we wouldn't do anything that was wrong. And, everyone, and that was a really nice reaction, because I didn't know which way it was going to go, to be honest with you. I didn't know if people were going to shout at me or cry or storm off or anything like that, but they got it. And that was nice. And I think in the local community as well, because, we've got a good standing in the local community, and at the time we'd been here for 5 years, I guess, when we announced it. People know us, they trust us. And, I think they just believe that we're going to do the right thing. We haven't broken that trust or that kind of, that contract, with our staff, with our community, with anyone really. So we were fortunate in that regard, but that's just because we've just always tried to stick to doing the right thing and, living and extolling our values consistently. So that would be my advice, is, just kind of, build that rapport, build that trust internally. And, hopefully, that will give you that kind of loyalty and that resilience that you're going to need to kind of push on and continue on your journey. Because, when we did open the new brewery, I mean, I think it was harder than starting the business 5 years ago. It's such an intense period.
Let's talk about that then. So,
sorry, 5 years before we partnered, 10 years ago.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I was doing research for this. I saw a campaign. I think it was your out of home campaign, Grit and Glitter.
Yes.
Which I think was beautiful and was across the tubes, etc. But I actually think Grit and Glitter that is the founder's journey. There's grit and there's albeit very sparse and brief moments of glitter as well. So you talked earlier. You said there's a clash of cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a clash of cultures even if you don't sell, but new people come in. And as we said, like a brand is like a baby.
Yeah.
At some point, that brand needs to mature.
Yeah.
People leave, bugger off to new things. Talk about the clash of cultures. What was the biggest clash?
I think you want to make sure that you get people excited and engaged with your brand. And, you basically, Heineken have a sales organization, and, it's obviously by nature, it's very commercial. And, they'll look at, profitability and all this kind of thing. And, different brands will have different levels of profitability, and they're trading beer, they're buying it from the breweries and they're selling it to their customers. So they're performing that kind of trading function. And their job was to go out into the market and represent our brand and our beers, which are, the highest price on the bar and that kind of thing. So, we had to work together to make sure that they could do that on our behalf. Basically, they could go out and explain to their customers why it was the most expensive beer on the bar. It's brewed on a small scale, uses expensive ingredients. It's for various reasons. So, you've got to kind of do that education piece internally so that it can also happen, in a sales discussion. So there's that, I think. And, just how you market brands as well. Like, we're a very small startup, and we're going to do our marketing and our comms differently to, a big brand in the Heineken portfolio. Now, we don't actually work with their marketeers. We still have full autonomy and independence in terms of marketing, and that kind of thing. But that can also be beneficial because you can see what tools and techniques they will use to kind of, build brand awareness and drive trial and that kind of thing. But we're going to do it in a more grassroots way. So you've got to be quite resourceful, and, you won't have the same resources that a big brand will have. So you've got to be still like a startup and agile and, bring in people who have that knowledge and experience. But also, like, we've always at Brixton Brewery tried to not bring in too experienced people. And I think there's a balance, because you might bring in people who have kind of got, all the stripes and, have been around and, worked in various places and have kind of proven themselves, with a track record. But my preference actually is to hire people that you feel are going to fit well into your culture and show potential. So, like, my most senior people in the business, on the brewing side, sales side, and, marketing and design, like, they weren't senior people, but they've grown into senior people with us. And, one of our most senior brewers, he basically worked not in our tap room, but another brewery's tap room. And then, said, can I have a job in the brewery? And, we gave him a job, and, he's, worked his way up, and, he's very well qualified now and that kind of thing, So he's been with us literally from the ground floor to where we are now and all the way up. And I love that. Like, for me, that is also what motivates me and why I started Brixton Brewery is to give people that opportunity. Now, obviously, you need people in important roles who have good experience. And there's two ways they can get that, is by basically learning on the job with you, or, if that's not enough, and, you can bring people in from outside. But my preference has always been to kind of try and hire at a more kind of junior level and let those people rise with you. That's worked well for us. Whether it will do going forwards now that we're kind of a more mature, bigger company, I'll have to wait and see. But, everyone will, bring something new. But I think if you allow them to grow with you, they're just going to really smash it, because they're just going to feel really happy in their job that they've got this amazing opportunity.
And how do you, when people do leave, how do you navigate that? Because it's something I haven't really talked about. I have kind of talked about in the podcast, but you have that core team and a lot of people will go. It's just the nature of the beast.
It is.
How do you navigate that as a leader?
You hope that not too many people do it simultaneously because, you don't want to be running too many recruitment processes simultaneously. In fact, I think it was last year, I had an operations manager and a finance manager both decide to leave within a couple of weeks of each other. And that put a huge amount of pressure on me personally because I needed to replace them and I needed to, do the recruitment, the interviews and that kind of thing. And, we did replace them both successfully, but it is, a strain at the time. So, obviously you don't want that. You want to try and avoid too many people doing that simultaneously, but obviously, that kind of stuff's out of your hands. But, we also want to retain staff. So we work hard on, giving them opportunities for progression, training, career development. And when you are growing, you do have the ability to do that quite well. Obviously, there'll be certain areas of the business where people will say, okay, well, there's nowhere more for me to go. And you don't want to stand in the way of that either. I don't believe in that. I think you kind of have a conversation, you be honest, you be upfront, you don't hide that, perhaps there won't be a bigger role for you in the future. And you give them your blessing and you wish them well. And, we just had a 10th birthday party on Saturday and the two people I'm just referring to both came back, both came to our party and partied with us. So, we remain friends and we keep in touch and we wish them well. And, but, as I said, we are lucky to have, a lot of long-standing employees who have, come in at a lower level and have really kind of risen through the ranks as well. So,
what's been the darkest day? Because I know, like it for me, it sounds like it's all like been hunky dory, and I just know that's not the case because it's like everyone I've sat opposite the table or sat opposite on Zoom, your hope and your vision needs a fuck ton of grit.
Yes.
And it's going to get dark and it's going to get rough.
I think.
What's been the worst day?
I think you've got to be really resilient. And I don't think there's any one particular thing that I could put my finger on and say that's been the worst day. But there have been periods when, you're gonna come close to exhaustion, burnout, and possibly even, hit the wall. Just because there are so many balls to keep in the air. And I think if you are like the leader of the business and the founder and you've got, so much to think about and, you basically, when you've set your business on this path, so, we did that by selling to Heineken, you really want to capitalize on it. You want to prove that your brand has the potential that you believe it has and that they obviously invested on the basis that they believed it had as well. But building brands is really, really hard work. It's intense because there's so many different facets and angles to it. So, you end up focusing a lot on on a lot of small details, you know. And I think, you know, I personally have high standards, and you know, I want to make sure that every aspect of our beer and our brand, every touch point, every beer flavor, everything is as good as it can be. And I think if that isn't the case, so for example, you might have a quality issue, or I don't know, you might have some sort of I don't know, typo. I'm thinking of a trivial example. Like, those things, you know, will challenge you really hard, because you want to always be pushing forwards, but you're going to have inevitable setbacks along the way. It's just the nature of, especially in beer, you know, it's just such a difficult product. And I think dealing with those, I'd probably find the hardest is, you know, you're basically, you have to go into firefighting mode at times. And that is kind of really quite draining and hard. But also you're going to have a team around you that, you know, will support you as well. But I think it's when things go wrong is like when I find it really hard. Yeah.
And how do you keep face as a founder? Because the founder has to show emotion, but if you wear your heart on your sleeve too much and you look stressed and you look anxious, then that spreads like cancer through the team, and then they can eviscerate the culture. So how do you separate the Jez looking in the bathroom mirror thinking, God, this is intense, versus the Jez, we can do this?
Yeah. I think you need to try and communicate a lot. You know, do things like emails with updates, have company meetings, and that kind of, you know, to keep people pulling and pushing in the same and the right direction. I think I've got better at kind of dealing with my emotions and, you know, being more sort of rational. You know, I think as you gain more experience, you get better at that. And, you know, you kind of, you know, you can evaluate whether a problem is a problem or not, and how big a problem it is, and, you know, come up with a solution, and that kind of thing. I think I'm quite light-hearted by nature and jokey, and, you know, I think you've just got to have good working relationships with people, you know, try and socialize a lot. So the taproom where we're sat now, I think, is a really important tool in the business, because staff can come here after work, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and have a beer. You know, we have a beer allowance per person. And I think it's nice because people from across the business will come and have a beer together, and, you know, allows us to bond and sort of share ideas. They probably sort of talk about me and things like that. But that, I think, is like, in beer, I think the culture is really nice because it kind of revolves around tap rooms and socializing. So, you know, we'll get together here, we'll have a barbecue in the brewery yard, or we'll go and do an activity or something like that. And that, I think, really helps because, you know, you're not just all together at work, but you're also together at play, as it were, as well. Like, and, you know, that just helps kind of allow those pressures to kind of ease, and, you know, you have a beer together, and, you know, you're all mates again, kind of thing, you know, and you're not in that kind of difficult meeting or discussion and that kind of, and often you're seeing the consumers or the customers enjoying your beers, and, you know, that feeling has never gone away. I remember when we opened the brewery in 2013 and we launched it actually down the road at the Craft Beer Co. And I remember seeing people buying our beer, and I'm like, they're actually buying our beer. I was amazed at it. And I still love that today. Like, I love, obviously in the tap room, they can only buy our beer. But if I go to one of our customers' pubs and I see someone ordering a beer, like, you know, often with my kids, and they're like, ding, ding, daddy, someone's got a Brixton glass, and that kind of thing. And I, you know, that is just the best feeling. And I think, you know, that's why food and drink, I think, is this amazing industry, because you get that kind of gratification because you're seeing it on sale, and you're seeing people buying it, and you're seeing people consuming it, and you get a good ego trip from that, to be honest with you. So that, I think the tap room is a really important tool, twofold for that, because I don't just see it, but the staff see it and they're like, what we are doing is important. You know, people are here and they're proud to basically work for Brixton Brewery because they know that, you know, the brand is popular, and that, I think, is really helpful.
I think beer is quite unique in that respect, in that you can, through tap rooms, we did with actually Josh from Momo, we did a Hungry Momo drink up in Camden, actually. But which was, we'll have to do the next one here.
You're very welcome.
But what is interesting is your staff and team can actually integrate over beer in a tap room, which is kind of unique to this category, in that you know, you can't really do it in other categories. But I think in terms, it galvanizes and shortens the distance between the customer and the team, and it's kind of a virtuous circle.
Absolutely, yeah.
In terms of, before we hit the record button, you said two things to me. You said, I'm still winging it. I was winging it back in 2013, and I'm winging it now. But then we also said that the founder's journey is, you learn more about yourself as much as it's about creating an amazing brand, as much as it's about doing something for the community, etc., etc., as much as it's about people coming here and enjoying the beers. There's actually an internal transformation and journey you go on as a founder, which you can't get anywhere else. And that's why I love talking to founders.
Yeah.
How have you changed from the Jez, say I was to interview in 2013 when you started the business, versus 2023 now? What's the personal growth you've gone on?
I've just learned so much. You know, as I said earlier, I was in like a bubble, and it's a lovely bubble, but it's maybe not reflective of like the wider industry and the real world and that kind of thing. So you grow a lot in terms of your knowledge, especially commercially. You know, just sort of making a lot of decisions. You've got to learn to assimilate a lot of information very quickly and try and make a good, sound decision. Because as you grow, you know, your number of staff and that kind of thing, you know, people will be asking you stuff. And you just want them to have confidence in themselves, but also in you giving them direction and that kind of thing. So I've had to learn to, I think, be a leader, to be honest with you. When the business was small, you know, I think when we first partnered with Heineken, we were maybe 10, 11 people, you know, small. We were all in basically one little mezzanine there and that kind of thing. And, you know, the business was easier to run in a lot of ways. And then, you know, you've got to grow. You've got to provide that leadership, that direction, that vision, that confidence, and that stable platform that allows everyone else to basically do their jobs well.
Well, just to go further on that, because I think a lot of people listening to this are the small brand who are trying to become the big brand.
Yeah.
What would you say, or that you've learned, if you could boil it into 3 principles or like sentences, like, this is what I've learned about leadership and it's really helped me grow my brand? Mm-hmm. What would they be?
I think you should try and document stuff. So whether that be a process, a policy, an instruction manual, a distillation of the brand, you know, in terms of the identity and the tone of voice and the values, because, you know, you move from basically an oral history where you're passing it down orally, you know, and you're telling people, but when you get to a certain size, that doesn't work anymore because there's just too many people to kind of assimilate that information to. So you need to basically think long and hard about what your brand values are, what your brand identity or your plan is going to be, and try and write it down and you know, test it as well, because as you get bigger, you're less able to change tack and direction and that kind of thing. So you want to like really think very hard about these things and, you know, project forward, you know, do I still want to be saying the same things that I was saying when I started up, or do I want to change the message or refine the message and that kind of thing? So I think codifying things is really helpful. So not just the brand, but, you know, around your HR, because your people are the most important thing in the business. And and you want to make sure that, they understand the working environment, and, health and safety is really important as well. You want to look after your people, you want to make sure that no one gets hurt or injured. Brewing, there's potential to, get burnt, to get, exposed to chemicals, to have a fall, or, there's all sorts of things. So, all of that kind of structure, I think, is really, really important. And you build those foundations. And if you do it earlier on, then, it just provides a really solid base to kind of everything else to flow on from. So, we've spent a lot of time just, I think, documenting stuff and procedures. And also, like, imagine if, you've got an employee with loads and loads of knowledge, and, they have it all in their head, and they're, I don't know, off sick, or they're on holiday, or they leave the business, and that kind of, you lose that knowledge, and, it's hard for someone else to come in and pick that up immediately and that kind of thing. So, we've documented all sorts of processes and procedures around that. That is pretty boring stuff, to be honest with you, but I think it's part of the maturity that we talked about, is like, evolving and becoming more grown up, more professional, whatever you want to call it. But I think it's important to do that stuff.
It's funny, like the romantic notion is the founders, the avant-garde trailblazer, the Steve Jobs, the sort of bowls in, and I think that's what is the romantic story. But I think more people have sat opposite is actually it's if the brand is the soul of the founder, or the long shadow, I think is the quote we came up with. Well, there needs to be a way for that to be spread through and systemized. And unfortunately, it may sound cliche and boring, but it is the systems.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting. Is there anything else on the leadership piece that you could pass on to someone?
I think just be open and approachable and stay humble, and if you can be friends with everyone in the business, like, you can't be their friend all the time, but do it as much as you possibly can. Because, there's, there'll be times when you're like, ooh, we need to look at our sales, or we need to look at our production outputs because we're not getting enough yield, or we need to look at our logistics because, we're not able to support more customers through our logistics platform and that kind of thing. So, don't take your eye off the ball of anything, and always be looking ahead and say, the business is good now, but is it still going to be good for what we need it to do in 6 months' time? And, I think planning is really important. When we were independent and small, we would plan on a very short, sort of small time horizon. And then, obviously, we partnered with Heineken, and, they need, security of supply chain, because otherwise they're not going to keep growing the brand if they don't think that there's going to be enough supply to kind of fulfill and that kind of thing. So you need to start planning, brewing capacity, budgeting, cash flow, all those kind of things. Like, you need to be really disciplined to make sure that your business can support the growth that might come along. Otherwise, what might happen is it can't, and you've blown your opportunity basically with a big customer or something like that, because, they might not trust you to be able to keep up with them. So, a good example, I don't know, you say you work with a big supermarket and, you start selling lots of beer, just make sure you can scale. And, I think in brewing, where you tend to have your own production facility, that's your responsibility. Maybe other industries, you might be working with a partner who is basically producing on your behalf. And actually brewing, it's a bit of a hybrid. Like, a lot of breweries contract brew and outsource some production because they can't do it all in-house. You got to make sure that your partner can scale with you. But, all this stuff, and this maturing is hard, but it's definitely worth doing, because it'll just help you sleep easier at night as a founder, because you're like, yeah, I've thought of probably most things I need to think about. There's always going to be a curveball that comes along that you haven't thought about and will trip you up. And even 10 years later, we find curveballs that we just couldn't have thought about. And they do trip us up. We had a weird one the other a couple of months ago where we had this strange flavor in one of our beers, and we didn't really know where it was coming from. And, we looked at all of our brewing records and everything looked fine. And, we evaluated everything, and we traced it to a batch of hops that we buy from the Pacific Northwest in the US that had been tainted by wildfires in the US. And the flavor in the beer was like a little bit sort of chipotle, smoky kind of thing. And it was because of the hops. And we didn't know that was even a possibility kind of thing. So we contacted the supplier, and they were like, oh, well, we have stringent, robust QC processes, that shouldn't have allowed this to happen. And we're like, well, it did happen. And this is the batch. And, so little things like that can catch you out that, you've been brewing for 10 years, you've been using the same hop for 10 years, but all of a sudden something like that, which is just a bit weird and out of the blue, can trip you up, and then you have like a potential quality problem and that kind of thing.
I think I love what you're saying, Jez, and it's for listeners, it's do the boring but important stuff. The important stuff is boring, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But it's important.
And that's how I probably changed the most is, I said I'm winging it, but I'm winging it less.
Yeah.
And, I fully see the value in doing this stuff. Whereas before I just didn't have the time or the headspace to do it because I was, keeping other balls in the air. But I really strongly believe in this stuff now because I've seen the benefits that come with, doing it well, doing it thoroughly.
And then also on the point about the chipotle hops is that something will always go wrong. And I think I actually flew to New York to interview Athletic Brewing.
Yeah, I heard that podcast.
Oh, yeah. So, when John said, every day expect something to go wrong. And that's actually changed with me because I used to editing podcasts and all this stuff. There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that basically always goes wrong.
Yep.
And before I used to just flip out and be like, for fuck's sake. Whereas now it's just like...
I'm getting better at that as well.
It's having space, creating space between the Pete Tongness and almost trying to be more like Mother Teresa versus Pete Tong.
And I think actually as a leader, it's better if you do have that reaction, you kind of not take things a little bit in your stride, but don't panic basically, because it's probably not as bad as your initial reaction thinks it is. And you'll find a way to, you'll just, you get better at solving problems, and, with experience, you learn what are problems and what are just sort of little bumps in the road kind of thing.
There's the Stoic quote, which is, we suffer more in imagination than reality, which is something I know of, but I don't always apply it. In terms of what's one obstacle that at the time seemed seemingly insurmountable, but retrospectively paved the way forward, and that's based actually off a Stoic book called The Obstacle is the Way.
Insurmountable. Wow.
It seemed insurmountable, but retrospectively now was the way forward.
I can't think of one, to be honest with you. I'll have to have a little think about that. But I don't think there has been one, because I just think my attitude is we'll just get it done, or we'll find a way, or I don't think I've ever found anything insurmountable. I've found things exhausting and draining, and but I've never encountered anything where I thought, this is not something I can get past or resolve or find a way forward. And I think that's the other thing as a leader in the business is, be bold and be brave. And I'm fortunate that I have the security of the Heineken ownership, and before the full ownership, it was the partnership. And I know that my thinking and my kind of bravery or my decision making is informed by that. If I were an independent business and I didn't have that kind of safety net, I think I would probably feel differently. And I massively respect and admire the other brewery founders who don't have that, and have done what they've done with their businesses, and really scaled,
Such as?
In South London, there's a few kind of, breweries that, have, invested a lot, grown a lot. I mean, Beavertown, I mentioned earlier, Logan there, really, really pushed that brand forward and as hard as he possibly could, moved, breweries a few different times, which is when you're always at your most vulnerable.
Why?
Because you're basically anticipating that you're going to keep growing, but you may or may not do. There might not be that headroom in the market, or that pull from the consumer and that kind of thing. I think a few breweries have done that and had flown too close to the sun and not been able to fill the extra production that they.
What brands?
So there was one called Hop Stuff, for example.
Hop
Stuff, yeah, and they built a big brewery in Deptford, and I think they felt like they were kind of following the Brewdog model, so crowdfunding, and sort of craft beer for the masses, and they grew too fast, and there wasn't that demand in the market. The brand wasn't strong enough, and went into administration. The crowdfund investors all lost their money. The business was bought, or the brand and the business was basically bought as an asset sale by, I think, Molson Coors for not a lot. The founder left the business. So that's, one example. There are others. So it's not, a given, and that's why I say you're vulnerable when you expand, because, there's a few others like Wild Beer Co. It happened to, Brew by Numbers, it happened to, and that kind of thing. So I think, that's also why it was quite an easy decision to partner with Heineken 5 years ago, because I knew that it would ease some of those pressures on me personally.
I interviewed Rob Wallace from Moth, the canned cocktails.
Yes, yep.
And he said something that's really stuck with me, which is that setbacks and failure won't really, that's when you don't need to worry. Like, that's ultimately just getting back on your feet again and going again. When you're most vulnerable, which is what you've echoed there, Jez, is when you're about to grow. Growth is what can kill you, is when you're not prepared to grow, or you've forecasted growth. Look at these vegan meat brands. I mean, that is just, I interviewed Giles Brooks. It's an absolute car crash of a category. There's like, there's this, it was almost like the .com boom for brands. And actually going back to the story, that's where, a brand is essentially a fiction where people have almost believed it too much, had this sort of Santa Claus thinking in the category, and actually you boil it down and the ingredient deck looks like a Streatham drug deal. Do you know what I mean? To put it like that.
Good analogy.
Yeah. But it's fascinating. And in terms of, so one thing I obsess with is how you keep the magic as you scale, and in your specific circumstance, how you keep the magic when Heineken own the business.
Yeah, good question. So you keep the magic, I think, by staying true to your values, and as long as your culture is strong, and your culture needs to start from day one, in my opinion. You can't apply a fix to culture at some point down the track. I think it needs to start from the right place, and just, be strengthened and reinforced and built over, a period of time, so that you're seen as being consistent internally and also externally. People know you, trust you, can see that you're like the real deal kind of thing, because I think people will see through it otherwise. communicate it. So things like, writing it down, what are your values? Think really hard about that, because you have it in your head, but you need to articulate it. And, that I think is important. And then you can kind of share it really easily. It's like, how books kind of, were a disruptive technology because there was an oral tradition and then everything got written down and then, ideas spread and that kind of thing. And, I think...
Well, you're basically writing your story.
Yeah.
Is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then that makes that story spreads and then the culture builds.
Exactly. And, we have a really cool story here at Brixton Brewery, I think.
Which is?
Well, just, the founding story, I think, is important. That's basically how it starts. So, you mentioned Manor Life. Stu's got this great founding story about how he met these peanut farmers in Argentina. It could be anything like that, which people can link back to and relate to and buy into and all that kind of thing.
Because I read the story was two couples, both had kids, moved to Brixton, bonded over beer. Talk to me about the genesis of that.
So that is the story, and it's all 100% true. None of it is made up because I've been on a few brewery tours and I've heard the founding story. I'm like, that's not actually quite how I remember it because obviously I follow the industry and that kind of thing. But anyway, so my wife and I bought a flat in Brixton in 2006, and Mike and Social bought a flat at exactly the same time across the road in 2006, but we didn't meet until 2010 when we both had our first kids. So there's like a month age difference between my son Joseph and their daughter Saskia, and we were in a bar in Brixton called Hive Bar. It's on the corner of Beehive Place, and back then in Brixton it was pretty much the only place you could get a gourmet hamburger. Now you can't move for gourmet hamburgers. We were in there on a Sunday with our baby Joseph in a pram, and Mike and Social were in there at the same time with Saskia in a pram, and Social, Mike's wife, came over and sort of looked into our pram, and we started talking, and we were pretty much the only people in the bar at the time. And Mike and Social are Canadian, my wife's British, but grew up in Canada. So we had that connection, and we were like, hey, where do you live? And they're like, yeah, we're on Saltine Road. And we were like, hang on a minute, we're on Saltine Road as well. And, then you sort of start talking like, what number are you at? And they were basically diagonally opposite to each other. And so we'd been living basically really close to each other without our paths ever crossing until that Sunday lunch for 5 years. And then when I found out where they lived, I'm like, Mike, I've been in your bedroom. Because I'd viewed the same flat. When I was buying the flat I bought, I'd viewed the one that he bought. So that freaked him out a little bit. We started hanging out. Then I was having a beer with Mike, and I sort of just made a flippant remark. I'm like, we should open a brewery in Brixton. I could see what was happening in Bermondsey, Hackney, places like that. And he was like, well, you know what? I actually wanted to open a brew pub back in Canada, but my dad would never let me. So we kind of joked about it. But that was kind of like a bit of a light bulb moment. He sent me an email, I think, on the Monday and said, if we're going to open a brewery, we better learn how to make beer. And he bought this beer kit on Amazon, a Mr. Beer kit. I didn't want to be outdone, so I'm like, okay, I better do something. So I registered brixtonbrewery.com. And that was kind of the first step. That was like the stake in the ground. We had none of the skills, none of the experience, none of the knowledge we needed to open a brewery. But from that point, we just sort of started method acting and taking baby steps. So we made the Mr. Beer kit. We kind of boiled it up on his hob in his flat, fermented it in his airing cupboard. And I remember Libby and Social had T-shirts made for us, like fictional T-shirts, and they said Brixton Brewers, quality beers at the end of the Victoria line. I still actually have the T-shirt. I tried to wear it for our 10th birthday party, but it doesn't fit quite as well as it did then, so I didn't wear it. But we were like, maybe we're the people that could do this in Brixton. But what really motivated us and drove us was I didn't want to be the person that had the idea and talked about it and didn't do anything about it. I wanted it to be us. I didn't want it to be anyone else. And I was actually really amazed that Brixton didn't yet have a commercial brewery, because there were breweries in all other parts of London. But I guess it was, Brixton was not as gentrified or whatever reason. It was held back for some reason. So we made it our mission to be the people that open the brewery. And we've had quite a few people over the years who've come to us and said, yeah, I thought about doing that. I'm like, but you didn't. We were the people that did it. And, that really drove me forward is, if you see an opportunity and it's all about timing, embrace it. So it was like that in 2013 when we opened the brewery. It was like that again when Heineken came and we did the deal with them in 2017. I feel like there's windows of opportunity to do these things. And we've been fortunate to have had two, basically. One starting the brewery, and then the other was when big brewers were looking to partner and acquire craft brands. We were both in the right place at the right time for both of those opportunities. And, I feel like maybe the time has passed for both of those things now.
What I love there, two things you said is we were method acting and we were, and I think, I don't know, you said your wife made those T-shirts which said...
Yeah, Libby and Social both had them printed.
Yeah, printed
together,
say Brixton Brewery, just down the...
quality beers down the Victoria line.
Quality, that is writing the story. You know how we said a business is a fiction?
Yeah.
That is, as much as it is you writing down the story and the values and doing the boring but important stuff to get the team galvanized, you have actually believed the story yourself by putting a T-shirt on, method acting.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot in that for people listening to this. Is if you can get granular and glacial clarity on your story, even if you have to fake it. I mean, kind of with this podcast, I had no an idea what I was doing. I just said, right, I'll be okay at podcasting.
Yeah.
And it seems
and you are.
be working out on about that first 2-3 first 20 were awful. The one before I did Charlie Bigham, and I was pacing up and down my flat thinking, this is hideously scary. I've got no idea. I'm so out of my depth, but I believe the story, and I think there's something real value in that.
And then you can manifest it, basically.
Yeah, but you've got to believe the story. And I think in terms of like how... Because I think one of the common themes is it seems too good to be true, right? And you said there's these two opportunities that have come around. There's opportunities for a lot of other breweries at the time. You seem to have a superpower to spot the opportunity or lean into the opportunity. Could you speak to that? How do you do that?
I think it's leaning into it. I mean, you have got to spot it, but other people spotted it way before we did, but in other areas, basically.
What do you mean by that?
Like the Colonels spotted it a lot before we did. Brewdogs.
Colonel, I've never even heard of them. Mine.
They're one of the pioneers of London brewing. And a lot of London brewers will, say that that's what inspired them to get going. I think Ian from Brick Brewery in Peckham basically was inspired by them. Lots were Brew by Numbers, who I mentioned earlier. Like a version of the Colonel. Red Church, who were one of the early London brewers, were basically an imitation of the Colonel and that kind of thing. I think spotting the opportunity. I think we were also inspired by a success story from across the pond. So Brooklyn Brewery, which started in the 80s, but their story...
Was that when... Sorry to interrupt, my curiosity's bubbling right now. But so when did craft beer start in the US?
Officially? I would say... the 80s, I would say, most of the current big breweries in the US, like the more established ones, around that time. You can trace it back to Anchor Steam Brewing, which I think was much, much older. They've actually just been closed by, is it Sapporo? Their owners. They're like a really old historical brewery, and some people trace it back to them. But around the 80s. And the story of Brooklyn Brewery is one that is very, very similar to us. They were two neighbours, started home brewing. wanted to open a brewery to kind of bring brewing back to a local area that, you know, it had died out. There was actually a Brixton Brewery. There was a brew pub just up the road here, which we didn't actually know until after we had started the brewery and someone told us about it. There was a brewery in Stockwell called Heineken, and actually one of the descendants of the Hamertons has started a brewery under the same name, but they're actually in Islington now. They're famous for an oyster stout. He still brews an oyster stout and that kind of thing. So, you know, we basically looked at the Brooklyn story. We thought, you know, Brixton, Brooklyn, they are some similarities and that kind of thing. So the two founders of Brooklyn Brewery went about setting up the brewery in quite a similar way to us. They actually wrote a book about it called Beer School that I read, and I'm like, well, I'm basically just going to follow this blueprint. I love this. You know, I think it's great. You know, you basically started a brewery to serve the local community, and that's how Brixton Brewery started. You know, we started small, we started humble. Our original business plan was just to supply beer to bars, restaurants, and pubs in Brixton. We didn't have a delivery van. We didn't even have a trolley. I would borrow the trolley from the neighbouring arch, and I would wheel the beer down this road into Brixton Market. And, you know, for I think maybe the first year of the business, that's how we made every delivery. Where we'd actually met as founders, Hive Bar then became the Craft Beer Co., which is where we launched the brewery 10 years ago. And I would wheel casks down from the arch to the Craft Beer Co. You know, that's how we basically started, was on a very, very local, very humble basis. Like, our first business plan basically looked at all the bars and restaurants in Brixton, and we guessed how many cases of beer they would order a week. And, you know, we made a list and we're like, okay, well, they'll take 4, they'll take 1, they'll take 3. And we totted it up and we kind of worked the business plan back from that. And it's actually been the most accurate business plan we've ever written. It was really spot on. And people got behind us. The local community got what we were trying to do, which was super, super nice. But we had a strong conviction that that would be the case, because basically Brixton just embraces stuff like this. And I remember saying to Mike, I think we're going to have to try really hard to screw this up. So we didn't have the knowledge, we didn't have the experience, but we had this just such strong belief that drove us forward and, you know, made us want to make the most of that opportunity, basically.
As I said, I think Brixton and Camden and Notting Hill are probably the 3 strongest, other than Soho. Like, as more like a borough, as they say in New York, the boroughs.
Yeah.
But I think they're super strong brands, and yeah, we were talking about the amount of food businesses that started here. Was it Franco Manca, Honest,
Cricket? There've been some really, really amazing success stories that started right here in Brixton. Yeah, and I think there will continue to be honest with you. Yeah,
it's like the winds kind of here. So do you speak much to Jasper at Camden?
No, I never really got to know Jasper personally. We obviously would attend beer festivals where he would be at, and London Brewers Alliance, which is kind of the organisation that all breweries in London join. And I remember him, you know, being in meetings and that kind of thing. But the breweries, or the brewery founders that I know best, are the South London breweries, just because we tended to know each other more, because, we basically would borrow stuff from each other, or still do. Is there like
a sort of a bit of like, I keep thinking of Ali G, where it's like the south side is the best, west side is the best.
There is, I would say, yeah.
Really?
I would say, you know, you've got, you know, the sort of the Bermondsey guys, the Hackney guys. Obviously, Jasper was in Camden. There's not that much going on in West London, I would say. And then, South London, I suppose, is, you know, the kind of the crew that we're with. But
is there like actual like because that's why, again, we talked about it earlier about why I love challenger brands so much, is the tribalism.
Yeah.
Is like, you go to, I know you are kind of all on retail specifically, you are fighting for finite shelf space.
Yeah.
but I do like that tribalism and that, like, I'm part of this thing
Yeah.
and I'm going to grow this thing. Is there like beef at these shows? Not like actual overt beef, but
No, I mean, we joke about it, I suppose, and like, you're on our patch or our turf and that kind of thing. But I actually do think that craft beer started as quite a local movement.
Yeah.
You know, so pubs, bars, restaurants, and they still do to a greater or lesser extent, support their local brewery. And that's kind of why we started out, you know, is so that we could be that local option for those businesses. But then certain brands have obviously grown out of their locality, and you have to if you want to grow, right? You can't just stay local. The opportunity is limited locally. So, you know, I think, you know, one thing I really love is being on the bar in Camden. And, you know, we enjoy a really good, strong rate of sale in Camden, which, you know, you don't know if that's going to be the case if you're taking the name of a local area and you're going like north the river. Like you don't know if that's gonna work, but luckily it did. You know,
that's what I was going to say. Because, like, not to be disparaging, but if you were to launch a Canary Wharf beer, it ain't going to fly.
probably not.
Or if you never know.
I mean, if it's a canary, it might.
yeah. Or like if you were to launch, like a Canary Wharf or like a Romford beer, it's not going to fly as much. So how did you drive the rate of sale? Like, say in bars up north, did Brixton have such a pull?
It's taken a time and it takes work, and you've got to raise awareness, and you know, you've got to drive trial. You've got to get people to try the product before they'll basically buy it. I mean, I think a pint is the perfect trial size for a product. But
so what are you doing to drive that trial? Is it
you try and do activation? Yeah. So we actually have, over the 5 years that we've been in partnership with Heineken, and before that we were like, most of the beer was sold, you know, within 5 miles of the brewery. We've been growing in quite a strategic way with a focus on London and the Southeast, because that's what we know, or where we know our awareness is the strongest. But it does have a ripple effect. And, you know, Brixton as a location is well known, you know, it's iconic. So that's really fortunate for us. You know, so many people have passed through Brixton, you know, been to a gig, been clubbing.
David Bowie.
Yeah, David Bowie. Like, you know, there's so many interesting things about Brixton that people already know about. Like, so Brixton, the place, has awareness all over the country, but Brixton, the brewery, maybe not so much. We've been really fortunate in that our original brand identity that we started with 13 years ago hasn't changed. You know, we nailed it, basically. You know, we're really happy with how the brand looks. Obviously it's evolved and we've kind of tweaked it a bit, but it's still recognizable, you know. And borrowing from Brooklyn, who I said earlier, who are really known for their bee, you know, we have a bee that just kind of is a beacon and signals, this is our brand, this is Brixton, kind of thing. So having that consistency, I think, is important in brand identity. You know, helps, you know, people being able to recognize your product really quickly, easily. Like, there's some breweries that seem to rebrand every 2 years, but we've never done that because we got it right from day one. But yeah, so when you go on the road and you go further and further afield outside your heartland, it's important to try and have flagship retailers, whether that's in the on-trade or the off-trade, who'll show your brand. And, you know, they'll want to get behind you as well, because you're like giving them something that they haven't had before as well. You know, they'll be feeling, oh, well, you know, I'd like to, you know, try this new brewery that, you know, isn't like local, but, you know, I've heard good things about them, and, you know, I've heard their beer's good, and, you know, the brand looks good on the bar or on the shelf and that kind of thing. So they'll want to get behind you. Obviously, you've got to back that up and make sure that, you know, you work with them to ensure that their customers connect with the brewery and the brand. You know, POS is something that we've invested heavily in, point of sale, you know, whether it's glassware, bar runners, tap handles, keg lenses that give you that standout. So, you know, you can go from being quite small and in like a craft beer bar where, you've kind of got the cognoscenti or the craft aficionados who recognize your brand. But as you grow and you're kind of breaking out of that bubble I talked about, you got to make sure you've got all the tools to support that growth. So you've got to have that strong brand identity. You've got to have the POS, but also go into pubs and activate. Spin a wheel, give out prizes, give out merch. Give out 50 free pints and that kind of thing. Like that grassroots stuff is really important. So we have a team of brewery ambassadors that do that on our behalf, basically, and they can really move the needle on your rate of sale in a venue by doing those kind of things, and it creates like a virtuous circle,
But do you go into like specific towns and just do that first? Because I think one of the mistakes I've made in the past is you try and boil the ocean, and actually you just need to create these. Seth Godin, the marketer, I don't know if you've heard of him. He says if you were to drop a thing of dye, like say purple dye, in an ocean, it wouldn't go anywhere. But if you were to drop it in a swimming pool, that whole swimming pool would go purple. And I think of that a lot with activation. It's like, don't go for the whole of Manchester, go for South Manchester. Yeah.
And pick a few key flagship venues to activate in, and then get those working well. Make sure that you learn, like, okay, you talk and you communicate, and you talk to the operator and like, how's it going? It's going all right. Is there anything we could do to make it go better? That kind of thing. Like really, really prove and refine and hone your strategy, because what works in South London or the Southeast may not work up there. Maybe we've got 5 core beers in our portfolio. You've got to pick the right product as well, to be on the bar. Some products will work better than others, and that's been a learning for us. Like we are pretty good at looking across a bar, looking at what the offering is, and saying what we think you should have from our core range, for example, to complement what you've already got. And that, you've got to do that on a bar by bar basis, really.
It seems, back to this tribalism, it seems quite scrappy in that regard, because I think Camden had the kind of the red.
Yeah, Hell's Lager and then,
but the taps.
The primary colours.
The primary colours is really good. The Beavertown have got the weird anarchistic kind of skulls and stuff.
Yeah, Spacemen,
skulls. Really good brand. So how do you make it different and make it feel Brixton on the POS? I go to some bars, I'm like, I've got a lot of mates. Do you know Aaron Duff, actually?
No, I don't think so.
He used to work with Kira at Heineken.
Okay.
Now he's the head of on-trade at Lucky Saint.
Ah, nice.
He's a good mate of mine.
Cool.
But I'm just like, I go into booze, I'm like, Aaron's had his troops here. Do you know what I mean? They've been kicking about.
Execution is so important. You've really got to make it stick once you're on the bar is kind of the easy part, making it stick, making sure you have that, consistent rate of sale. Otherwise, you're just going to come off the bar, to be honest with you.
But how do you make it stick? Like, so is that like getting your kind of the people who are on the ground, build a relationship? Like, what you do?
Relationship is important, but also just execution. Make sure that they've got glassware, they've got bar runners, they've got a tap handle, they've got a lens.
What are bar runners and lens?
So the lens is the round kind of badge that you get. We've got some up there on the beer wall. And they can be backlit, which makes them stand out. Because, apparently the average drinker, as they approach the bar, is going to make a decision on what they're going to order, and they're only going to give like 3 seconds or something like that, and then they'll make the decision. So you've got to influence that buying decision in a very small window. So, you want to have, and the bar runner is these sort of rubber mats that you put the glasses down on and that kind of thing. So you've got to try and be at that kind of the cold face, and or work with the pub, to make sure that they're kind of getting behind you. So through the relationship, staff training, and then hopefully they'll recommend your beer over someone else's, and that will all these little things brick up into driving sales.
I don't know. I was listening to a podcast on the way up here actually about I don't know if you like rugby, but the how we won the World Cup in 2003.
Yeah.
And Clive Woodward came in and he said this, I don't know what the exact terminology is, but it's 1,000 little things done well.
Yeah.
And he basically said, we won, we brought a winger in called Jason Robinson, who was super rapid.
Yeah, from Rugby League.
Yeah. But back in the day, the rugby jersey was super baggy.
Loose, yeah.
And he said to Nike, he goes, I want you to make me a shirt that will win us the World Cup. And they go, what's the issue? He goes, we've got the fastest winger in the world, but people are grabbing him and he can't score bloody tries.
Yeah.
So that was a 0% edge. Nike make that skin tight shirt and it wins them the World Cup.
Yeah,
I mean, it's these little things, isn't it?
No, I totally agree. And I think British cycling had a similar philosophy with David Brailsford, and he called it the accumulation of marginal gains. And if you can find a tiny little advantage or edge in a lot of different areas, once you add them all together, it actually translates. And that resonated with me. I didn't get it from rugby, I got it from cycling.
Yeah.
But it's the same concept, right? And that's basically why I still want to be in the brewery every day, because I want to be looking for those and working with the teams to deliver them, because then, you just feel like you're just going to keep pushing forward and, don't ever become complacent, basically. I don't think that's going to happen to me.
How do you ensure that? Because once Heineken are on board, how do you ensure that like you're still acting as if you're scrapping? Do you know what I mean?
Because I want to ensure my legacy, and I want to make sure that Brixton Brewery reaches its full potential, because I think it can just continue growing and growing and growing. I mean, it'll reach a ceiling at some point. I don't know what that is, but I feel like it's
where do you want it to be? Do you want it to be what's like? If say we record this in 10 years' time, what does success?
I mean, talking about Brooklyn Brewery, if we can be as iconic as them, I'll be very, very happy. Yeah.
Final question, mate. I'm absolutely thoroughly love this and super grateful for you having me here. So I was doing a bit of research on the founding of Brixton, not Brixton Brewery, of Brixton. And it said whether this is bullshit or not, but it's just good for the podcast. But it said in 1067, a man called Brishy Stain founded you may have heard this, he basically put up some pole, erected a stone, and people gathered around it. And this is, yonks ago.
He was a Saxon overlord or something.
Saxon overlord, yeah. It's actually a really good YouTube channel which goes into all these towns. Sick. I'll send it to you. It's very interesting. But anyway, so what the final question is say you were to erect like a totemic pole, and you could have one sentence of wisdom for our listeners to see as they are kind of going on their journey, and they drive past it every day, or they see it on their run. What would it be and why?
I think it's about the beer. And when we talk about our beers, we say we're always seeking balance. But I think it's not just about the beer, but the beer is kind of an analogy or an embodiment. And what I want people to glean from the beer is like the first sip needs to be as good as the last sip. Like the first sip needs to be an enjoyable experience, and the last does. And, don't make it too intense, too strong, too overpowering. But I think that's also kind of a bit of a mantra or a philosophy for how we run the business as well, like is keep everything in balance, like don't go too fast. You'll burn your staff out. Don't, be too big-headed or like flamboyant or over the top, because don't get cocky. Things could get rocky kind of thing. Yeah. But also don't be complacent, just keep things in check, keep things in balance. So I see it when we talk about the beer, but actually I think it's more universal than that. And I think it's just, I think, there's a few like sort of, like meditation or, maybe it's a Buddhist tradition and that kind of thing. And, they're talking about balance and, you know, you've got opposing forces all the time going on. Just try and keep everything in balance. We do it with the beer. We try and do it with the business and the company culture. And just keep things in check. Keep, you know, humble, keep real, stick to your values, you know, make sure that everyone knows what they are, so that they can do that as well. And, you know, we have another saying in the brewery, you know, where we say, you know, get a taste of Brixton. And, you know, that's also got a double meaning. You know, we want you to get a taste of Brixton, the product, but we want you to get a taste of Brixton, the area. And the values that Brixton, the area have, you know, community, diversity, openness, we have in the business as well. But they're also universal values. And that's why I think people connect with our brand anywhere and everywhere in the country, because there's communities everywhere. You know, pubs are communities, and you know, we want to share that. But I think it's a good way to live your life as well. You know, as you know, just try and extol those values. You know, we do that in everything that we do, and I think that's going to stand us in good stead, hopefully.
Mate, been an absolute pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you so much, Jez.
Thank you.